This is Neil Rockhind. I'm the host of the Killer Cross-Examination podcast. And week in and week out, we feature some of the very best criminal defense lawyers, very best civil trial lawyers anywhere in the country. We pick their brains. We talk about war stories. If you like the content, subscribe and like. We've got thousands upon thousands of views on our YouTube videos. We've got thousands of listens and likes and shares on the podcast, which you can get on any platform, anywhere where you get your podcasts. And today is no exception. I've got an incredible guest, Gerry Goldstein from San Antonio, Texas. Gerry, welcome to the Killer Cross-Examination podcast, my friend. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Neil, and thank you for those kind lies.
You probably rehearsed that line when everybody says anything nice about you, right?
Well, usually, and they usually are, but you were particularly nice. Thank you.
Gerry, tell me about your career. How did you get into criminal defense? How did you get into trials? Walk me through that, please.
Well, my dad was a lawyer. My mother wanted me to be an artist. I was an art history major at Tulane. That was because the Tulane was, this is back in the early 1961. Everybody, Tulane was boys, Newcomb was girls. I went to Brown for a couple of days, an all boys school, and I'd never been to Providence, Rhode Island. In those days, you didn't go check anything out. And I took a train, which was the popular means of transportation back then, to New Orleans, where I knew I could have a good time. My father thought he paid for a matriculation, not an education. And I really had no interest in the law, but I got out of college in 1965. The war was raging overseas. Students were rioting in the streets at home. I went to law school because it gave me a draft deferment. I'd gotten a notice from draft board number 9. There was my turn to kill or be killed. And I went to law school because I was a chicken shit. I wanted to stay out of the war.
Okay. That's an honest assessment.
Yeah, well, it's true, honest or not. And I had no idea how much I was going to love it. I got out of law school in 1968, and it was really in turmoil. I loved law school. I did fairly well. I mean, I was hired by the University of Texas as faculty and taught there for almost 19 years. I'm still teaching at a law school here in San Antonio at St. Mary's. But what I learned about law schools is that many of them, like Texas, didn't look at your transcripts when they hired faculty. That was the first good thing. But I was interested in criminal law. It fascinated me. And that was back, the Warren Court was blazing. We had I met my bride, who you've met, of 54 years. We bought a Volkswagen bus. We pulled the seats out, put a Persian carpet down, little pillows, big peace symbol on the back, Ramsey Clark for president on the back bumper. We got run out of more South Texas counties than we got invited back to. And I was representing conscious objector, draft dodgers, kids with one joint. We had 13 people in Texas serving life imprisonment for one joint.
Wow.
13. And I met a wonderful lawyer by the name of Maury Maverick Jr. Wonderful. And that's a story in itself. And someday we ought to talk about it. He was my patron saint and my mentor, and he took me all over the country. His father was a congressman. He was a congressman. He introduced me to Justice Blackmun. My first case, they sent me to help Bill Kunstler with the lawyers who Judge Hoffman, with the appeal for the lawyers who Judge Hoffman had held in contempt in the Chicago 7 trial. So I met Jerry Lefcourt, Michael Kennedy, Michael Tiger.
Those are giants.
And by the way, that's how, I mean, I lucked out. I mean, it was a great time. And I had more fun being a trial lawyer. You know, I'm right at 80 years old now. I still get 100 days of skiing in, but I'm still trying cases. I'm still having fun. It's theater in a way, but it's street theater. You know, it's you've got the characters, you know what the story is, but nobody gives you a script. You get to play it out, and I'm particularly happy when they're good lawyers in the courtroom with me. You know, and you play tit for tat. I've seen you before.
Why do you you mentioned that as though there are lawyers who may not want to be in the courtroom with other good lawyers?
Well, I'm not saying I enjoy the moment. Nobody likes getting beat up, but I think we're at our best when we're challenged. And you know, we can talk about cross-examination all we want, but preparation is what goes in, what makes a good trial lawyer, what a good advocate. And if you're prepared, you know, you could probably try the case to each other. Both sides have a good idea what's going on. I mean, I'll be honest with you. If I had my way, most criminal defense lawyers would disagree with me and even hate me. And, you know, we revolutionized the Texas discovery practice with the Michael Martin case, which resulted in probably the most enlightened state discovery rules in the country. And we got in a lot of arguments about this, but if I had my way, I probably would agree to open discovery. Good civil lawyers, they have what do we not have? We try by ambush. We don't have depositions in most states. We don't have requests for admissions. We don't have interrogatories. You try the case basically blind. And other than Brady, which, you know, is pretty tough in a lot of instances, you really don't understand. And by the way, half the time I'd like to see what bad shit they've got, you know, about my client, as much as I want to have the good stuff. You know, and you know, some of the most important discovery in criminal cases around the country happens at trial. Oh shit, I didn't know they had that, you know. And if you ask your witness, he'll never testify against me. We're brothers, you know, right? I mean, how many times have we all heard that?
Yeah, guy's the first one on the witness stand. So
yeah, usually.
Hey, Gerry, let me ask you, Hunter Thompson, so much comes to mind when you're talking to me, but Hunter Thompson was a client of yours, and I think someone that you were close friends with. If I'm
guilty. That's true.
Tell me about that relationship. And the reason I say that is that Hunter Thompson, I think, once wrote an article or described you as the maestro of cross-examination, or the
by the way, he was very gracious to me. I represented him in 3 cases, but there were other wonderful lawyers. Hal Haddon out of Denver, Saskia Jordan and his firm. You know, I get to take credit for their hard work. But at the end of each case, he would let me write this is one, Songs of the Doomed. By the way, he would write books at the end of each case, and he would then let me write the last chapter. This is one, and this is the finding. It says final analysis, Gerald Goldstein Esquire, and it actually has our letterhead and everything. And it's a letter from me to him because I would brag about him. But the truth of the matter is, we had fun. One trial they brought in Ralph Steadman, you know, the wonderful illustrator that illustrated all of Hunter's books with the splotches and all that stuff. And Aspen still has 2 newspapers, believe it or not. But one of the Daily News, I got to cross-examine the cop. And, you know, nobody enjoys something more than that. And and by the way, I promised the judges there, I don't urinate my playpen. My father taught me better, so I don't try cases. in small town. They got plenty of good lawyers. They don't need me coming in. But Hunter Thompson, a couple of other folks on occasion. But basically, they don't need me to practice law there. But one of the newspapers says the front page of Friday, August 30th. This is 1996. Aspen cop grilled by Thompson lawyer. That's me. Thompson's lawyers go on shark hunt. The Gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson's hearing on his charges Thursday turned into an inquisition of his arresting officer. And they even had, you can't see it, but it's they had a, Ralph Steadman came and he had an illustration of me on one side and Officer Glidden, and it was Maestro, me with a baton. It's not a very flattering caricature. Steadman wasn't very good at that, but and it calls the hidden Glidden, and it says Thompson's attorney Gerry Goldstein. I'm in that, raked Glidden over the coals, leaving him by the end of the day, according to one reporter's account, not quite certain how to spell his own name. I was, I kicked ass. I was so happy. And the next morning I lost that hearing. And I learned two things. One, never believe your own press. And two, if you're going to win one day of a 2-day hearing, always try and make it the second day.
Mm-hmm.
But we did win the case, and I did get to write another last chapter.
Would you tell me something? So something strikes me. I mean, you're very eloquent.
Yeah.
Now you are. You're colorful. You certainly have character. You're smart. I've seen you work up close in a case.
That was fun.
It was fun. Your mother, you said, wanted you to end up being an artist, and you ended up going to law school. But it seems as though, in some ways, there is an artistry to what you do in court.
Well, there's certainly courtroom. It's theatrical, but it comes in all shapes and colors, and you see that when you look at the media, when you look at movies, when you look at television, and today on the the digital internet, I wear a sincere blue suit, and I dress up, trying to impress people, and that's one thing. And look at Jerry Spence. I mean, he's got this, bolo tie and fringe on his jackets and shit. And Tony Serra, he had hair down to his tushy. He usually wore a dashiki. Everybody's got their own shtick. You got to be yourself. And I think we can steal from each other. And God knows there are no original thoughts, particularly not in the law. Mm-hmm. I think we've all, you learn by experience. I've been doing this 55 years. A lot of this shit, you've made enough mistakes where you wanted the earth to open up and you could disappear. On all our walls are all the cases where you've seen it. We've won. And Michael Tyler, a wonderful lawyer, still alive. He once came in and said, Goldstein is pretty impressive. But if you put up articles about all the cases you lost, you'd need 3 more buildings. And Maury Maverick, who I was mentioning to you, and we are going to get to him at some point. I'm going to come back and do him because he told me this is my mentor. In 1968, when I started practicing, he said, Goldstein, you want to be a criminal lawyer? Practicing criminal law is a lot like the old hen in the hen yard. Peck, 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 all over the hen yard. Every 100 pecks, she comes up with a kernel of corn. The other 99 times, she gets a mouthful of shit. And that's really, what we do day in and day out. It's not like watching paint dry, but we wade through a lot of shit. Yeah. But we do it for those kernels of corn. We do it for those moments. And like, I guess, childbirth, you don't remember all the pain and all the shit you had to wade through.
Right.
What you remember are those wonderful moments when truth comes out, when you actually uncover and dismantle some piece of shit who comes across as a badge-bearing, icon. And by the way, I've won cases because of honest law enforcement. I'm not saying, I'm not castigating every law enforcement officer, but it becomes a competition. I did spend a semester at the University of London in law school, and we were honorary members of Lincoln's Inn. I'd go there for lunch, and you see all these robe characters with the with the wigs and shit. And one day they would be Queen's Counsel, I guess now King's Counsel, and the next day they'd be defense. And I think collegiality is important. Some of my best friends, I get in heated battles with them, but I respect them. I teach a course now at St. Mary's Law School with the former U.S. attorney who is still the chief of staff in the U.S. Attorney's Office. He's been a prosecutor all his life, and I've been defending people for 55 years. But I don't like arguing cases. I actually argued a Supreme Court case with him, but mainly in the Fifth Circuit. But he's so straight and so knowledgeable and so my life is an overstatement. Anyway, this guy understates everything. But it's as though when you're arguing a case and on appeal against him, it's like his argument is chiseled in stone, and Moses just drug it down from the mount and handed it to him. I think credibility is critically important, and particularly in cross-examination. The jury, it's not they've got to like you; they got to believe you. And if they believe you, then you're telling them a story.
They can like you, but not believe you, right?
And that won't help you.
Right. So,
yeah.
Tell me so you've been involved in some really significant and controversial cases, I guess. I know at one point were you involved in the what's the acronym? Is it the FL? Is it
FLDS?
Yeah. Tell me about your involvement in that and what that was like.
It was, let's put it in the interesting to exotic category. I actually found them very interesting people. It was a religious sect, and you don't have to agree with everything, but they lived a very interesting life. It was very communal. I guess that goes without saying, but they like many Mormons, they took life seriously, and they were very loyal to one another. And for example, you look at their clothing, they made their own clothing. It looked like my wife calls it Target, but it looked like a Walmart. It was a big store on their property. And the sign as you walked in was, take what you need, not what you want. And you walked in, and they had like 5 different kinds of washing machines and sewing machines and stoves and ovens. They lived a very modest lifestyle, but I'm an aging hippie. I got out of law school in the late 60s. There's something to that lifestyle. I mean, I've fallen prey to greed like everybody else, but I think, we all could have made a lot more money doing something else. And I cherish the lifestyle that, as an aging hippie, I learned in the 60s.
What was the case about, and what was your role in it?
The case was alleged that they all participated in sexual assaults of children, of underage females. And I was the lead counsel. That, by the way, you want to talk about what goes on our border under Trump. Think about this. They took hundreds, I think it was over 300 children away from their parents. And the family law issues were staggering in the case, about under what circumstances, and you just generically just rip, if they were faithful to the faith, did they not warrant having children? I mean, how did you make those decisions, which are normally made on an individual basis? They had a hearing, and they had to use the auditorium. in this
Hmm.
little town. The town where their temple was, which was made out of marble, and it was twice the size of the county courthouse. It was a pretty impressive place. Well, they had to conduct the hearing in a nearby larger town, San Angelo, in their convention center, just to house all the lawyers. It took might have been 2.5 hours just to seat the lawyers.
Hmm.
And how are they going to give individual attention to the well-being of every one of the kids? Anyway, that was what the case was about. And we had some wonderful, you talk about particularized information about the place to be searched and the items or persons to be seized. They had no idea. They just went in there and shut the whole place down. And you talk about a general warrant. And so we had some really interesting issues, but their patron saint, who was in jail in Utah, when they moved him to Texas to be prosecuted, by the way, they considered all non-FLDS members Gentiles. So I was, for a change, I was a Gentile. I'd never been called that before, but apparently that's a dirty word. And he fired me when he realized I was Jewish. And the issue became, how are they going to expunge my knowledge of their sacred scrolls, which I was using at least nominally in some of the arguments. It was fun. I got fired just in time not to have to suffer the indignity of trying these cases, which they tried ad seriatim, putting people in jail for long periods of time. I'm talking about, 70-year-old. One person was 80-something years old, and they put him in jail for 20 years. I'm not, Willie Nelson, who just had his 90th birthday, who I had the pleasure of representing. Well, I got to just tell you about Willie.
Yeah, I want to hear about that.
Well, he was busted in Louisiana in the bus, and the Billy Rittenberg ended up helping him. But when they busted him, the deputy sheriff, this is in the deputy's report, he says, I found a shoebox, and I brought it to him, and I said, this appears to be marijuana. And in his report, he says, Mr. Nelson responded, it was during the E. coli scare, and he said, thank God it's not spinach. And Willie ended up doing a concert for a federal institution that had suffered a flood. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Anyway,
it's got to be pretty amazing to you to think about the span of your career, going back to Willie Nelson and a question about marijuana on a bus, to individuals that were.
I was going to tell you that with respect to the FLDS, and then we'll get off of that. Remember, Willie said, I think a few years ago, he said, I never thought I'd outlive my pecker. But an 80-year-old is not a danger to young children. I know that from life experience. But thank you for the compliment. Look, I've had
you were practicing law when there were people in Texas who were serving life sentences for a joint.
Yep.
And now, marijuana legalization, as it seems, is on the ballot every year or two in another state.
No question. And by the way, don't forget Keith Stroup, who started NORML. That's how I met Hunter Thompson. I was on the first board in 1970. Keith Stroup, who became a law partner of mine, and I represented him in that notorious Canadian case. But what a wonderful guy. I'm going to see him next week in Denver. He still is active in the reform movement. And he tricked me early on into standing up and telling the truth. That's we had amazing fun back in the 60s, but it mainly fell upon minorities and poor people. In Texas, the Hispanics. They were but we had one kid who was actually a white kid. We had what we call the habitual statute. And if you got 3 felonies you got sentenced to life without prison automatically without any sentencing or punishment hearing once you were found guilty. And there was a guy named Thomas Maestro, Mistrot, and he was serving a life sentence for one joint. And it was during a period of time when the Texas vending machine lobby was very strong. And so his first felony was breaking into a Coke machine. His second felony was breaking into into a parking meter. All right. And his third felony was a marijuana joint. And the Playboy Foundation.
I mean, these are petty offenses. I mean, these are
Of course
petty
they are.
minor offenses.
Can you
No.
imagine serving life in prison? And the Playboy Foundation actually funded us, and we ultimately got the law changed, and he was freed. And I still hear
You've been active in NORML and have actually, I think, given their lifetime achievement or bestowed an incredible honor. You've been at I think you were an NACDL. Were you a past president, or you were
I am.
and you've been given a lifetime achievement award there? I think
got outstanding lawyer in the country, the Haney Award. I was the past president, but if you practice law for 55 years, you're going to find some kernels of corn. You're going to get some awards. Everybody will. I know you have. And they're wonderful, but it's tomorrow that matters. And I think, as long as we're still active and still, there's going to, I hate to say this, I don't want to scare you, Neil, but I can see the end of the tunnel. I'm hoping it's that bright light is an opening and not a train coming in my direction. But, at some point, when you're a kid or a young, you worry about death. And when you're 80 years old, look, it's going to come. I mean, it's not just inevitable, but you've got less time left than you've been here. And you just take it in stride, and it's made my religion of faith has turned into hedonism. Not in a bizarre kind, but I mean, I can't do much about what happened yesterday, and there's only a little bit I can do about tomorrow, but I can do something right now today. And that's why I'm with you. Make a difference. Do something, make this place a better place. And what you do today, you're not going to regret tomorrow. And I think most of us have been blessed with a wonderful opportunity to make a difference. And that's one of the things when I was a little hippie in law school, with no shoes on, I remember, in those big arenas, and you'd hang your feet in we only had 2 women in the class of 100 and something, but my feet obviously needed a bath. And the woman in front of me finally asked to be moved because nobody above her had shoes on. But it was 1965, 66. And there was something, and that draft notice, Maury Maverick always said, Goldstein, you didn't have a conscience until you got that draft notice, and you were sitting on your conscience. And he's right. And I think national service is something we all ought to give some thought to, just to give people an opportunity to see what it's like. My dad used to make me work in the service industry. He said, you spend some time, I don't care whether it's selling shoes or waiting tables or being a bar back, but you'll learn more about people by serving them than you'll ever learn by being serviced. And he was right. And that instinctive, it's what's good about cross-examination, is what's good about understanding how to pick jurors. Is it perfect? No, nothing's perfect. But when you look out there at our public, look, I think if we're going to do anything with the next administration, we better spend some money on education. People are buying into some strange bullshit. And I think it doesn't say much about our education system if they're going to buy into some of this stuff they're fed. And I'm not,
Gerry,
yeah.
No. I'm glad you're going there, because things are different now than they were facts aren't facts. There's,
Thank you.
we used to be able to argue about the law, and you could argue about the subtlety. Do you see things from this direction or that direction? You could argue about perspective, but now people have their own facts.
And by the way, and they've got this technology, this digital technology that allows them to create these images. I mean, it used to be, remember there was that ad for audio tape? Is it real or is it
live or is it Memorex?
Yeah. And Memorex. Well, now, by the way, they've got AI that now they opened a Senate hearing the other day with the chair actually using it to show there's an app you can buy, and if they have 7 to 10 minutes of your conversation, and by the way, it not only can mimic your thoughts, it uses your inflection, and you will, and I think they're going to get it to where even technology can't tell the difference between, well, what are we going to do when that happens? What are we going to do in when is it live or is it Memorex? Or can we tell?
Let me ask you.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
I think facts and the
These
truth.
are important points.
The truth and facts now have a half-life. I mean, until somebody decides differently. And
these are really important points. I tried a case several years ago in which there was an issue about a recording, and did our clients who were public officials, did they say a certain thing that this gadfly who was trying to get them in trouble, did they say this? Did they not say that? And we brought in experts and these different guys from all over. And the issue was with the quality of the recording, and was it spliced and was it copied? And then it got to the point where in the end, it turns out that, and this was years ago, where you couldn't replicate somebody's voice, but AI now you can. And then I learned during that case that if it's a digital copy, there's actually there's no original.
Right.
Like you record it, there's no original. It's not like you have a tape that you can just, in the old days, there's no tape to splice.
And by the way, remember when we used to have law books?
Yes.
I mean, by the way, it's all, and I worry sometimes. I hope this is an actual legal public. Remember when you had to shepherdize? I still remember back in 1965, and I would have a whole table at the library, and I would have the big red book, then I have the little red book, then the little red pamphlet, and then the yellow book, and then the black and white book. And you had to have perfect eyes or a magnifying glass to that. And if your finger didn't go across it just right, you got the wrong case. And I'll be honest with you, I can't tell you how many nights I spent. And I think being a good lawyer not only takes the ability to be active and to be on your feet and to be like a linebacker with your feet hip width apart and be ready to respond, but it requires not just preparation, but hard work.
I want to know now, how do you prepare for a cross-examination now, as opposed to how you prepared 30 or 40 years ago?
It's different, but it's the same. What you, generally speaking, I think in cross-examination is so hard with digital, but you can cleverly, I've seen you use PowerPoint, and just as we were able to change and do it effectively and be able to turn a black and white page into something that spoke words that we wanted to emphasize, and you're able to do that. But AI and algorithms allow us to find things that in the old days we couldn't. But in the old days, what you were looking for, cross-examining someone, one of the most effective cross-examinations is impeaching with a prior inconsistent statement. And I think there is a mantra, there's an art, a skill that you can develop, but we'll talk about that some other time or later. But you've got to find the raw material. You got to find that report that somebody wrote and signed where they said something different. You've got to find that transcript where at a bail hearing or at sentencing, a co-defendant said something much different in their allocution or in their bail hearing. That people don't testify normally these days, but when they were trying to get out of jail, and that was always kind of interesting, because that when they're not there to help you, they're spring loaded to try and shit on you, because the more they assist the prosecution. In federal court, it was codified into the guidelines, but it was always true. You paid rent for the courtroom, and the reward you got was somewhat dependent upon how effective you were as a witness. And that desire to curry favor with the prosecution is something that I think you developed that really well, but you got to be able to find the material to do that with. And today, I've always said that the biggest oxymoron I know is the warning that you get in computer wording about protecting the content from children. Shit. I mean, you and I both know. I've got a 33-year-old, but in our household, when your computer was fighting with you, you needed a 15-year-old to come do it. I mean, the idea that they weren't going to be able to get it right, you needed them to get into it, much less being able to keep them out of it. And look at them. And by the way, COVID really made us a little bit that way. But look at these kids. Leave a message for them on their voicemail, and they'll never see it. They'll go to their grave with that still there.
You ever ask them if it's,
but they're texting each other constantly.
And if you asked them if you held up a cell phone and said, what is this used for? In the top 4 or 5 answers, they won't say talking.
Of course not. And by the way, and think about it, it's become an extension. What was it in Riley that the Chief Justice in that unanimous opinion said? We've got 356 million people. We've got 1.5 times that many cell phones. I mean, it's an extension of their bodies. They're constantly looking at it. And I find myself doing if we had done that at the dinner table back in the 50s when I was in high school, my mother would have, she would have ripped it up. We were lucky to be able to go to that little television set after dinner. They're constantly on it, and they're constantly communicating. They're constantly receiving information. But that is a source of prior inconsistent statements. And if you're clever with that technology, you're able to use it, because in the old days, there was a mantra. Your Honor, may I approach the witness? I show you what's been marked Defendant's Exhibit A. Is that your signature? Well, it looks like it. Well, that's great. Let's argue about whether you know what your signature looks like for half an hour. That's better than talking about my client's familiarity with the unfortunate facts of the case. It's a transcript, and those little numbers on the side. It is like Moses chiseled. And do you remember testifying in a courtroom like this before a judge 2 years ago on October 25th? Well, yes, sir. And did you take an oath just like you did before this jury? You learned those little steps. Was it the same oath that you took here before this jury? Did you swear to God that you would tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yeah. And well, do you remember uttering these words? Well, if it says I did, well, let's argue about the credibility of the court reporter. That's better. Right. So you have that. Well, but you can kind of do that with our new digital, but you got to be very clever about it. And the courts are starting to get savvy. I mean, it's like if we use the PowerPoint simple, what you and I are adept at, in your opening or closing, I've got, particularly in federal court, I've got judges, and they want to see it before you put it up there. And, I don't know what I'm going to say before, well, you've got the PowerPoint, I've seen you playing with it. Well, I'm not sure which ones I want to use.
Right.
Can
Right.
I do it ex parte? No, I want both of y'all to show each other what you're going to do. I want, and it's like, we don't get to see each other's closing argument before we make them.
Right.
Yeah, but this is different. It's more influent, it's 403. It's, more prejudicial than probative. What do you mean? The fact that I put up a transcript of what that piece of shit said? That's prejudicial. Well, maybe to him, but
Oh my God. Some of these arguments are the things that I've literally, sat there and, and I don't have a PowerPoint, and I know some guys in the middle of, like, they're so adept at it that when the prosecution is up doing their thing, they're creating like a PowerPoint. They're creating things to use because they're listening.
and you know what? Let me tell you how rutterman. Let's go back to
the thing about those judges. The thing about those judges,
they weren't trial lawyers.
No, they weren't. And there's a now departed, and may he rest in peace, one of the finest trial lawyers, one of the most eloquent speakers I've ever had the privilege to go up against and work with, was a man named Albert Hatchett here from Detroit, from Pontiac. He was absolutely,
I've heard of him. I didn't know him, but I've heard.
Spellbinding. You'd sit there and as a prosecutor, you'd sit there and he'd be, or representing a co-defendant, and he'd be up doing something, and you would just be doing this, looking at him, and all of a sudden, judge would go, Mr. Akine, yeah, it's your turn. You're like, oh wait, I got to do something now.
Well, it's like a little Jewish kid in South Texas.
It was
on a
spellbinding.
Sunday morning, listening to AM radio, and some Baptist, Bible thumping preacher, and all of a sudden he's spellbinding, and you actually listen to something that you would never listen to otherwise. I think there are those rare folks, but
Albert once said about a judge, he said that judge, he said, he for years sought the refuge of the bench. He sought the bench like a refuge from the practice of law. And then he got there, and then within a second turned around and looked at us as though he had made the greatest sacrifice to give up the greatest careers that would have been the most promising career since Darrow, just to dispense wisdom. And every argument he'd have, he could resolve the greatest, most significant problems within 30 seconds. And I knew exactly. And when Albert told me that story, I knew he was talking about one person, I believed. And then it turns out that I think he was probably talking about, he was foreshadowing some years to come. So,
well, by the way, a lawyer sent me a quote the other day, and it said, what do you call a lawyer who over time continually demonstrates a lack of knowledge of the law?
oh, no.
Your Honor. Yeah.
Jerry, I got to ask you some questions. So I got to fire off some questions here, because I'm having too good of a time talking to you. Because you're such a good person. I hope that in this discussion, it's clear to our subscribers and listeners what a wonderful human being you are. And I mean that, because even
very kind.
You and I know but it's true. We could go a year or two, which I hope doesn't happen, without speaking, and 35 to 40 seconds on the phone with you, and I feel as though we've had a continuous running conversation in which you're up to date on the important things in my life, and that's a gift. That is a gift that you have, that not a lot of people
we
have.
shared each other's gifts.
So
in a case over a period of years.
Yes.
And I can't tell you. The feeling goes both ways.
All right. Tell me the thing, besides you, I know, and this is an easy one. First of all, people should know that you're blessed to also partner with Cynthia Orr, who's one of the finest lawyers in the country as well. And I also think a past president of the from the NAC.
And the past chair of the ABA's criminal justice section. And she's going in 2 weeks to the next Guantanamo hearing as a UN observer, which she's done 3 times in the past. Thank you for that. And
amazing.
She'll appreciate that.
So apart from your partner, because it'd be easy, and I know that if I asked, you probably would, of course, not just out of loyalty or fidelity, you would identify her as a fantastic trial
Yep.
lawyer because she is that good. But who's the best outside of your firm, over the course of your career? Who's the best cross-examiner you think you've seen? The one that made the most and lasting impression on you?
Well, there were two. One is Michael Tiger, who I mentioned to you, and he's got a technique exactly the opposite of what I do. I mean, totally 180 degrees.
Explain, please.
Tiger's approach is, my approach is, to give you an idea, is you're the storyteller. That witness is just a beacon that you're bouncing your ideas. That's why they call them leading questions. You're telling them what the answer is, and it doesn't actually matter. They'll put a question mark at the end of it. Isn't it a fact that, and you make the statement, they can do whatever they want to, or that's not true. By the way, it almost doesn't matter, because if you're good at it and you've taken the jury by the arm and shown them that you know what you're talking about, and that every time this lying sack of shit, deviates from the thing, you're going to pull their nose and stick it in it. There was a wonderful judge named Suttle once who actually in the middle of a trial said, Goldstein's got that answer. Why don't you just give it to him, because it's getting late. We just need to move on. But I will tell you that my idea is you don't ask questions that you don't solidly understand the answer to, and you can tell that story a lot better than some hostile witness who's there to dump on your client. Tiger, on the other hand, believes, and we did a dueling cross-examination program one time for NACD, for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers in Washington, D.C. And his idea is, look, you lose the audience if you're the speaker. What you need is to have the witness give the testimony, and when they do it, it's much more meaningful. Well, you got to be really skillful. I mean, his idea is you build a box, so wide and so tall, and you drop the little rat in it, and you then cut a little hole that and you make them run around until they finally figure out that's the only way they're getting out of the box, because you got them pinned in so many different ways. Well, there were probably a couple of people I've met. The other one was a wonderful lawyer from Texas, no longer with us, by the name of Warren Burnett. And he was one of those guys that came from Tennessee, but you could, it was like that preacher you run across, from some northern Mexico station that didn't have to meet our FCC rules. And, you could hear, the big bopper coming from Del Rio, across the border from Del Rio, Texas. He would stop you in your tracks, and they could spend a half an hour with a witness that you might spend 3 minutes on, because the witness, I'm the kind of person, and I know what I want. And when I finally get it from the witness, I will beat them to death with it and make my closing argument with it. Well, that might work with one witness, but by the time you do it with three, it gets kind of boring. And a dim light, even on a dumb prosecutor's forehead, will come on, and you'll get the witness to come, well, that's not actually true. And they'll explain to the jury why that wasn't true. But Tiger was, and Warren, they could take a witness and make them tell the story the correct way. And that's an art that I think you're born with. I'm not sure you can keep that.
If there's a person alive, or I'll say anybody in history that you could cross-examine, who would it be?
Donald fucking Trump.
And why?
Because
I've had lawyers on here that have cross-examined Donald Trump and wish that they had another crack at it. So,
well, I don't doubt that. But, when we were talking about having ammunition, this sucker loves to speak, and he does it in a recorded fashion. It's on, there is so much material out there. I mean, your average, witness to a barroom brawl in which somebody is shot and killed, they come off pretty sympathetic. They in South Texas, all of them were always in the bathroom, so they never found the witness. But if you got a witness that's not experienced, Donald Trump, I think, appears, and I understand there are people that believe him regardless, but he said so many different things about so many different subjects that he has created a fertile cross-examination preparation depository or repository that I would love to have all that ammunition and be able to, may I approach the witness, Your Honor? That mantra. I show you what, and he doesn't have the same advantage of that he would in another situation. I thought the deposition that they admitted at E. Jean Carroll's civil trial. By the way, she wrote a book about Hunter. In fact, she quotes me in it a couple of times. And I'll tell you about Hunter's relationship with her. But I thought her lawyer did a nice job with Trump and gave him just enough rope to go and hang himself with it. But and I don't care whether I win or not. I would just like to cram some of those answers down his throat and make him regurgitate them. Anyway,
Do you ever have any? Are there any cross examinations that you look back at, or any moments in trials? Could be voir dire, opening, closing, where you finished and you said to yourself, "Now, that was a work of art. I just knocked that one out of the park."
Sure, but the more interesting ones are usually humorous, and Maury Maverick, we were picking a jury in Deep Throat, which I went to the Supreme Court twice. Once they passed the attorney's fees award. We had sued the DA in San Antonio back at the time. It wasn't enough that it was a Class B misdemeanor. He decided he was running for office, that he would indict it and try it as a felony for the use of a criminal instrument. But by the way, this was the first big foreign movie to go nationwide, and it was shown on a 60 millimeter projector. So they got some poor kid, he was my client, who went to the Texas Employment Commission and, do you have any skills? Well, I used to show, the syphilis films in the boys' gymnasium, and they sent him up there. And so I had to pick a jury, and Maury said he would make me practice in front of a mirror. And I would ask questions like, Mrs. McGillicuddy, if you saw a film where a woman gets off of a man and there is semen dripping out of the corner of her mouth, could you ever find that to have redeeming social value? And he said, you're going to strike Mrs. McGillicuddy, and so you're embarrassed. We want to look for some guy that smirks or smiles when you ask her that question. That's your keeper. So you learn things. And we've all had. We just tried a very large federal wire fraud case involving bribery, and both a state senator and a judge testified that they got $1 million from my client. His defense was, yes, but I did pay them that, but it was not for a bribe. It was, for their services. In this, he provided medical services for the federal private prisons that were housing mainly INS detainees. But in that case, they had a witness, and he had 15 years that he was a lawyer, and he had 15 years that he had failed to pay his income tax. And you can ask, you didn't pay your income tax, did you? You didn't pay it for 15 years, did you? And probably that's effective, I guess. But I had he said, I asked him the first question. I put it up, the date up on a big screen. I said, and I knew what the answer was because he had given testimony in a pretrial hearing. I said, is it true that you said you didn't pay your income tax because it was too difficult to compute your tax? It didn't matter what he answered. He said, I had his testimony, the sworn testimony. Do you remember? So I did the remember thing. And then I put the next year up. And, and by the time I got to 10, the prosecution, the judge, Mr. Goldstein went, yeah, I want to go through each. I'm sorry, Judge, believe it or not, there's some more. I'm entitled to. And every one of those is a 5-year felony. And nobody's charged him with that. And I just want to know whether he's been given any promises. I'm in promising. Doesn't matter what his answer is. And then you just keep on. And then in closing argument, you get to do it again. And, I think sometimes repetition can be important, but sometimes it's the way you do it as much as the fact that you did it. Did he break down and say, I'm a lying sack of shit? No, but he was. And the jury acquitted this guy.
Hey,
And
Gerry,
he should have been acquitted, but anyway.
so Gerry, what's on deck for you? Where you, if people wanted to find you, how would they reach you? How would they look up your website? Do you have an Instagram? Do you have a Twitter account? Do you have any of that stuff going on?
I don't, but we've got a website. I think it's a very good one. And it's Goldstein and it's got a lot of good stuff about Cynthia on there and about every lawyer in our office. We now have 7 lawyers, and we've got 2 more coming on board after the exams, which is big for a criminal defense firm. But we have, we've been blessed with, a few kernels of corn, and and even if you don't succeed in the ultimate goal and you don't get an acquittal, there are so many different things you can do to service the client to make sure that you mitigate whatever punishment they're going to receive. I just think, and some of the best opportunities for examining witnesses is often at sentencing. Particularly in federal court, where the probation officer prepares this report and it's based upon hearsay, on hearsay, on hearsay. It's the agent telling her, well, this is what so-and-so told me. And often it's what he told me they said. And so it's third-hand hearsay. And I think a lot of times even judges give live testimony where they can actually look at somebody. And if you've got good evidence, and a lot of times you do, and we sort of just fall into this gutter ball and fail to take advantage of our skill set at a critical time, because 97% of your cases are pled because of the trial penalty, because going to trial with a 20-year minimum mandatory is just not an option. So you're going to, and by the way, there's a wonderful, the American College of Trial Lawyers, ACTL, that, I'm blessed with being a fellow in it. They put out and by the way, most of the Supreme Court justices of the U.S. are in that club. They put out a white paper on why, if 97% of the cases, the only meaningful day in court anyone has in most cases is at sentencing, is at punishment. Why in the world, if cross-examination is the crucible by which we're going to decide the veracity, why are we deciding that critical issue based upon hearsay, on hearsay, on hearsay? Why isn't confrontation critical at the punishment stage, at your sentencing? And I think that's an issue that one of the lawyers listened to this. I'm too old to get it done, but I think we're going to finally get there, because if that's how we're going to end up resolving most of these criminal cases, we need to have a meaningful hearing, if that's the only hearing people are going to get.
Well, I hope someone out there is listening, and I hope that happens. So,
me too.
Hey, Gerry, it has been great to have you on the Killer Cross-Examination podcast. I know I could talk to you for hours. I do want to arrange for you to come back
I would
and
love
to talk about is Maury Maverick. I think that's a be
I'd love it.
absolutely incredible. Just devote a podcast episode to just you kind of talking about him and the things, his sayings, the things he taught you. It sounds like he made such an incredible impression on you that
He did.
even to
And
this
not just
day.
on me, on everybody.
So,
So have you, Neil,
in
in a different way.
well, in a different, of course, in a different way. Hey, again, this is Neil Rockeye, and this is the Killer Cross-Examination Podcast. My good friend Gerry Goldstein was my guest. He's one of the best out there. This podcast will be released soon. Look for it on our website. Look for it on YouTube. You can find him at goldsteinandor.com, I think. Is that right? Is it goldsteinandor.com?
You bet.
And believe it or not, he's one of those guys where you could just Google his name, Gerald Goldstein, and you're going to get more information about him than he probably knows is out there. But there's a ton of it, and it's all
Don't believe it all.
positive, and believe it all, because it's all true. And he's probably edited a lot of it out to take out all the really fun stuff. But he's a wonderful human being and a great lawyer and a great person, and deserves every accolade he gets. So Gerry, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I can't wait to release it, and I'll certainly let you know when we do. Again, stay cool and thanks, man. You're the best.
Thank you.